Today on the newscast, an Israel election preview from Jerusalem. That's next. Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to a very special Watchman Newscast, our Israel election preview. Israelis will head to the polls this coming Tuesday, November 1st, for the fifth time in under 3 years. And I was joined in Jerusalem this week by two top Israeli analysts to break down what we can expect. Will Benjamin Netanyahu complete his political comeback and become prime minister once again? Who are his closest competitors? And what will his coalition look like? And what about current interim Prime Minister Yair Lapid and Defense Minister Benny Gantz? Where do they stand? And who is Itamar Ben-Gvir? And why is he the most controversial man in Israel right now? I sat down with Alex Trayman, CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief at JNS.org, and Ruthie Bloom, an author and commentator and a columnist at JNS.org, for an in-depth look at Israel's upcoming election and why it will have major ramifications for the Jewish state, the United States, and the world. Take a look. Alex, number 5 in under 3 years. How did we get here?
Well, we've had Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for 12 years consecutive, 15 years in total. And while he's been probably one of the greatest prime ministers in Israeli history, not every parliamentarian likes working with him. And so even though he remains Israel's most popular politician by a large margin, Israelis don't vote directly for their prime minister. You go to the ballot, you vote for a party. And then it's up to the parliamentarians to actually form a majority coalition. And unfortunately, you have too many parliamentarians that don't want to rally and join a coalition led by Netanyahu. The reason why we've had 5 elections is because those same parliamentarians that don't want to join Netanyahu also have a hard time forming a majority coalition to block him. So we continue to have a standoff after standoff, and now we're going to our 5th election in less than 3 years.
Yes, so it's not a situation, Alex, you broke it down beautifully. It's not a situation like in the United States, for instance, a Trump versus Biden. This is almost like party versus party in a sense?
Correct. If Israelis would go to the polls and pick their prime minister directly, Netanyahu would win by a substantial margin.
Yeah. Now, he has to form a coalition, Ruthie, of 61 seats in the Knesset.
Right. There are 120 seats in the Knesset. So 61 gives you a majority. Traditionally, this was too razor-thin a majority. Usually, they're a much larger majority. But in the last years, because of many reasons having to do with raising the electoral threshold and lowering the electoral threshold and trying various methods to make it more of a slam dunk victory for one or other of the big parties, it's been a mess. And Alex is right. This has to do with partly with hatred on the part of many parliamentarians, hatred of Netanyahu.
Personal animus.
Personal.
Yeah.
However, let me say how ironic it is that his party has garnered and continues to more seats than any individual other party.
And that is the Likud party.
That's the Likud party. And in addition to that, in every single poll of between Netanyahu and the other heads of parties, he is way above in suitability for the premiership. Yeah. So the thing is about him that it is true that he can be antagonistic to his rivals. However, he was not Israel's longest serving prime minister in history for nothing.
Yeah.
He was a great leader, and I think, and most Israelis know that.
Once and perhaps future Prime Minister Ruthie, great point. Hey, 15 years altogether as Prime Minister, the 3-year run from 96 to 99, and then 12 years in succession. Okay, I guess the big question, we're talking about coalitions here. We're talking about the Likud party, Bibi's party, being the most popular. Can he get to that magic number this time, 61 seats, and who will he align with? Who will he partner with in an attempt to get there?
Well, there are 9 parties in the current Knesset, 13 parties in the Knesset, 9 parties in the current coalition. So he has to form a coalition together with other parties. He leans to the right, he polls to the right, he campaigns to the right, and so there are parties that are religious parties, traditional religious parties, Ashkenazi parties, Sephardi parties. These are 2 religious different groups, and then you also have the more nationalist right-wing parties, religious Zionists, and so that is his preferred coalition, and it really is very borderline right now whether those parties will be able to cross that threshold. If they get 61 votes, Netanyahu will be the prime minister. If together those parties get 59 votes, he will not be the prime minister.
Yeah. And then we go to elections again, perhaps.
Might be headed to another election, because on the other side, Yair Lapid, who's the polling in second place behind the Likud right now and is currently the interim prime minister, he will also have a difficult time getting across the 61 threshold.
In fact, the current interim prime minister, Lapid, his best bet right now is having a 6th round of election and waiting for it, because what he knows now, which it is absolutely impossible for him to reach a majority without the anti-Zionist Arab parties. Even with them at the moment, he's polling below 60, even with all of them. So he knows that he has no chance, and he claims that he would not join a Netanyahu-led government or would not join Benny Gantz, who's our defense minister, and he has his own party. The left is very fragmented right now.
Let me ask you, Ruthie, is there, look, 5th election in under 3 years, is there fatigue among Israelis with all of this? First. Secondly, what are the big issues that Israelis are concerned about? I know there's a terror wave in Judea and Samaria right now. We talked about it off camera. Iran, of course, but in the economy as well. Start with you, Ruthie. What are some of the issues that Israelis are concerned about as they head to the polls?
Well, it depends which sector of Israelis you're talking about, all right? The middle and lower socioeconomic classes care about the economy right now. Prices are out of control, and there's not only is there inflation, but there's also just these supply chain issues because of the war in Ukraine, etc. Prices in the supermarkets are soaring. So I think that's probably their main issue. The Arab sector is very concerned about massive violence in the Arab sector, murders. Now I'm not even talking about terrorism against Jews.
Right.
I'm talking about inter-Arab crime.
There's been a crime wave in the Arab community.
And honor killings and revenge killings and, I mean, horrible stuff. Now, in the more, let's say, upper middle class and higher classes, you have concern, I would say, about things like Iran, or about this latest maritime deal that Israel is about to sign with Lebanon. Disastrous deal.
I want to ask you more about that, Ruthie. We'll come back to that maritime deal and interim government cutting such an important deal. Pretty interesting timing. Alex, what do you think? Is there a concern that some say, wow, what is going on in Israel? They need more stability. They have all these elections. We need a stable Israeli government with all these threats gathering.
Yeah, I think that people don't understand the opportunity cost of not having had a stable right-wing government for the last several years. Netanyahu had managed to forge several peace arrangements with Muslim-majority countries. Had sort of stabilized security. The last several years before this new transitional government were some of the quietest in terms of security, and things have become unstable for sure. But what I always like to tell people is that when the mandate to form a government does not pan out, at least it returns back to the people. This is democracy, and so returning that mandate back to the people is certainly better than the alternative. Yeah,
it's interesting. Some of Israel's critics say, well, it's a fascist state, it's an apartheid state. Fascist. 5 elections in under 3 years, 5 fair and free elections. Secondly, Ruth, you touched on this, Arab parties who are critical of the state of Israel, severely critical in some cases, serving in the Knesset, and some rather large parties. So that's democracy, folks. That's Israel. Ruthie, some similarities between Benjamin Netanyahu and former President Donald Trump, do you think, in terms of the opposition from the left and the mainstream media in the U.S. and Israel? Do you see, interesting, they had a great relationship when they were both in office at the same time. They're a little bit on the outs now, but do you see some similarities there?
Oh, definitely. We'll start with the fact that opposition to both of them in their respective countries is often more personal than political. There's a lot of the mudslinging gets down to the personal. He's a criminal, he's corrupt, he's this, as opposed to looking at their policies.
And the legal struggles and potential
and
indictments.
Instead of looking about how Trump, before the pandemic hit, the economy in the United States was booming thanks to Trump. And you mentioned their relationship. It's also very, very crucial in Israel, who is sitting in America. Now, Netanyahu did two things, opposite things, that were both crucial. One was he managed to maneuver the muddy waters when Obama was president of the United States. Then, with Trump in the White House, there was a mutual warm bath that achieved so much. Yeah. Now, Netanyahu's enemies claim, the left in Israel claim, what they like to say is, you see, we are better for Democrats because Netanyahu caused Israel to be a partisan issue in the United States.
He spoke before Congress,
right, which is, of
Iran
course,
deal.
It's the Democrats who made Israel a partisan issue. The Democrats turned against Israel. It is not, Netanyahu didn't do that, and Trump didn't do that. They reflect a situation. They didn't cause it. Yeah. And now it will be very interesting to see what happens in the midterms in America.
Yes, it will, right around the corner.
If you have Netanyahu back again, and if you have a Republican majority Congress, or at least House or Senate, or hopefully both, that'll be very relevant for anything dealing with Iran and everything else.
Yes, it will, and perhaps that Congress could block a potential Iran deal. A lot at stake right now, Alex. And when we're talking about the Israeli political landscape, the right seems strong and a very good chance of having this coalition come November 1st. Some have said the left in Israel is dying. What do you think about that? Obviously, the Labor Party reigned supreme for decades here until Menachem Begin. What do you think about the state of the political left and that whole movement here in the state of Israel?
Well, before the first election, you could look at the political spectrum and recognize very clearly that Israel is a very firm center-right majority country. And the left-wing parties had about 35 seats out of 120 in the Knesset. They were relegated to the backbenches of the opposition. And then, because of this growing hatred within the media and within the parliament for Netanyahu, you had several defectors from the right-wing camp that not only joined the left, but brought all those members from the backbenches of the opposition into key ministries in this country, including the foreign ministry and the defense ministry and many others, only because of their personal animosity towards Netanyahu. So even though the right had made so many gains here in this country and moved the country firmly to the right, you had a few selfish members of the Knesset that actually brought the left back into power. And the one thing that's different about this election than the first four is that the incumbent is now Yair Lapid, who's the head of the progressive left in Israel. He is the interim caretaker prime minister. And if there's no clear-cut conclusion to this fifth election, he remains in the chair of prime minister until a new government's formed.
And who is Yair Lapid, Ruthie? Alex, I want to ask you about Benny Gantz, the current defense minister. When you look at the landscape, it seems that Lapid and Gantz are Bibi's most serious challengers, I guess you would say. I'm going to ask you about Gantz, Alex, but who is Yair Lapid? For our viewers who might say, who is this guy? He's been caretaker prime minister for 4 months. Everyone in America knows Bibi Netanyahu. He's very well known to American
Lapid
audience.
was also, before that, foreign minister in Naftali Bennett's government. I'll tell you who Yair Lapid is. He is the son of the late Yosef Lapid, who was called Tommy Lapid in Israel. That was his nickname here, Tommy. He was a left-wing politician, so anti-religious that all he wanted to do was block religious parties from having any power in the country. Now, he called himself a centrist and formed a party based on change. You know, the hope and change. narrative that always pops back up, but he was actually on the left. Yair Lapid is his son. Yair was a journalist. He was also a bit of a celebrity. In other ways, he played bit parts in movies. Yeah. He was a sort of very hunky, gorgeous young guy. He was kind of like the Oprah Winfrey of Israel for a while. He did these one-on-one interviews that weren't really political. They were more like personal. And before the 2015 election, he formed a party, and people laughed, like, oh, a journalist. It started becoming more popular for journalists to join, to enter politics. Yeah. By the way, on the left, when a right-winger did it, they, believe me, it was like, it's unethical, and they just jump over. Anyway, he formed a party, and by some miracle, he got lots and lots of seats. The miracle was, oh, yes, we don't want Netanyahu, and we don't want the left. We want the center. Lapid is the center. Again, the baloney that constantly is fed to a weary public that is hungry to buy it. He's the center. He's, he's pluralistic. So he got lots of seats, and that sort of started his political career. He was the finance minister for a while.
Both of you, I'd like to get your take on this maritime deal, folks. Long story short, we've talked about in the newscast the past few weeks, Israel and Lebanon are about to sign this agreement, giving some Israeli maritime territory in the Mediterranean to Lebanon, essentially. And Lebanon will be able to excavate some of that natural gas. Israel supposedly will get some royalties from any fines that Lebanon has, if I'm not mistaken. We still don't know all the particulars of the deal, but Alex, to you, number one, is the deal problematic? Number two, is it problematic that an interim government is forging such a very, very important agreement?
Right, so this deal was in negotiations for the last 10 years. As people may have noticed, there's a lot of gas in the Mediterranean off the coast of Israel. Israel's become a natural gas exporter. There's also gas that extends into the economic waters of Lebanon, which is Israel's immediate northern neighbor. There's also probably some gas off the coast of Gaza to the south. And within this disputed area is a pretty large reserve called the Kana Reservoir. And it extends over both the territories of Lebanon and Israel. Now, for 10 years, they had been trying to negotiate with American help for some kind of 50-50 split, 60-40 split. Yair Lapid comes into office. Within weeks, the entire scope of the negotiations changes, whereby Lebanon gets 100% of their initial claim to the economic waters, and Israel gets an American guarantee that there might be royalties from the gas. Now,
it
should be a guarantee from the Biden administration.
Correct, and it should be understood that Israel's actually not even signing an agreement with Lebanon, because Lebanon refuses to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, refuses to recognize their existing land border with the state of Israel.
There are no diplomatic relations between Lebanon and Israel.
And the reason why this happened is because as soon as Lapid came into office, Hezbollah's chief, Hassan Nasrallah, sent attack drones in the direction of one of Israel's natural gas rigs that's about to come online, and said that if you don't give us this other rig in the disputed territories, that we're going to attack your rig. And so the Americans and Yair Lapid completely capitulated to Hezbollah demands and gave them everything, saying that they managed to avert a war.
Wow, and Nasrallah said, Ruthie, if I'm not mistaken, that Hezbollah's missiles are, quote, locked on that.
Yes, that's right. So, but, it's even worse than what Alex says, because not only did they do this, not only did they capitulate, meaning Yair Lapid and Biden, and by the way, he didn't need Biden's pressure. There's some people say, the White House pressured him. No, he didn't need pressure, okay. And a lot of even Israeli generals saying it's good we averted a war, which it's even worse than what Alex said. First of all, there is no such thing as Lebanon. Really, it's run by the Iran-backed terrorist organization Hezbollah. So this deal basically was made with Hezbollah. Furthermore, the reason that Lapid said it's urgent to get this signed now, before the end of the month, is because on the 31st of October, the president of Lebanon, Michel Aoun, finishes his term, and there is no replacement. So Lebanon, that already is just in a floundering mess will be even worse. And the day after the Israeli elections are. So quick, we got to do this before maybe there's a new government in Israel and before Lebanon collapses completely.
Yeah, short window.
So that's what, they pulled a fast one, then lied about it to said that's not true, we didn't capitulate. That's not true, we got lots of guarantees and we're going to get revenues. But if you read the agreement, which is in a lot of legalese and it's not so easy to do, it's not true. There are that they hope to, and maybe some percentage, but and the biggest lie of all is Israel saying that the reason this deal is so great is that we don't want Lebanon to fall economically. The left in Israel perpetuates the myth that you need to keep bolstering your enemy's economy so that they'll stop wanting to kill you.
Right.
And it's a lie.
Ruthie, Alex, great breakdown. Folks, by the way, you might hear some background noise. We are in Jerusalem. The city is vibrant. It's alive. It's booming. So there is construction, which is a good thing behind us if you hear some background noise. Hey, we're filming outside, but you can't beat the view, I have to say. Alex, great breakdown, Ruthie, of the Lebanon deal. Alex, Benny Gantz, the current defense minister, former IDF chief of staff. Interesting character, obviously long history in the military, relatively short political career, but defense minister now, and he and Lapid are saying they will not serve in a government with Benjamin Netanyahu. What's your take on Gantz and say Lapid and Netanyahu? Some have said, well, maybe they cancel each other out and Gantz is the one left standing. Is that a possibility?
Well, Gantz, as you mentioned, was a long time chief of staff of the Israeli military. The Israeli left loves to put generals at the head of political parties, even though it hasn't always worked out for Israel when a general does get to the top of the seat of power here in Israel. He ran together with Yair Lapid in the second and third election cycles. Those two actually split, but they are ideologically aligned. Gantz is probably not as much of an ideologue as Lapid. To many of the members of the Israeli public, he represents a responsible figure, maybe more so than Lapid, to lead a government in place of Netanyahu. But he too would have to form a government with the members of the Israeli left. Netanyahu and Gantz tried to form a coalition together with a rotation agreement after the third election. That government lasted about a year, just like this last government lasted. So both Gantz and Netanyahu have campaigned saying that they will not sit with one another following an election, but campaign promises are just that, and when the results come in, then we'll see who's willing to play ball and who's willing to sit with who. We shall see. Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister, also made some campaign promises that he did not keep to when it came to coalitions. And beforehand, you were coaching me how to pronounce it, and I still butchered it. Ben-Gvir. Well, he's a name that people should know from the Otzma Yehudit party. He may be part of Bibi's coalition, along with Bezalel Smotrich.
Right.
Somewhat
the
close.
two of them they just joined forces. They have smaller parties, individual parties, and to run in this election they joined forces so that none of the votes are in danger of going in the garbage. In other words, because you have two parties that are similar, you don't want voters to have to split their loyalty.
There's an electoral threshold. If you don't get a certain percentage of votes, then all the votes that you got go to the garbage, and then all the rest of the votes get redistributed. So in order not to lose votes on one side, smaller parties will often join together as a technical block in order to try to get across the threshold and have
right, exactly, because you need, and it's either you have 4 seats in the Knesset or 0, okay? You have to get up to 4 seats. So Itamar Ben-Gvir has become the biggest celebrity of this election. He is a former Meir Kahane activist. Kahana's party, Kach, was banned from the Knesset decades ago. He, in his youth, I have to stress this, in his youth, he was a Kahanist, militant Zionist type who used to say we have to expel all the Arabs. But he has since renounced those views of his youth. And the left highlights his name as though he's going to be prime minister. They say things like, they always say By the way, he's not even the head of the religious Zionist party. That's Bezalel Smotrich. Nevertheless, highlighting Ben-Gvir is a way of saying you're going to have a fascist, racist. They keep calling him all these names. And his popularity keeps increasing because the country is in such dire straits security-wise. And even Israelis who wouldn't be voting for a religious party have said, we're voting for Ben-Gvir because he's going to make sure to guarantee our security. And he wants a ministry in the next government. And by the way, if he gets as many seats as he's polling, he certainly will deserve a ministry, if not more than one, for sure.
He's number 3 right now?
He's number 3. He and Gantz are, it depends, sometimes one is above the other, but he's polling at about 12 seats at the moment, something like that. 12
Alex,
to 14.
Yeah. Is this kind of an uneasy alliance between he and Bibi, perhaps?
I think it's a natural alliance for Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir. They both sit on the right side of the political spectrum. Certainly, there is criticism on the left, tries to make Netanyahu look like a right-wing fascist by sitting with people like Ben-Gvir, but it certainly represents a much more stable government for him. And he's the most experienced politician in Israel by far, and I think he's going to have a very easy time keeping somebody like Ben-Gvir in place, much easier than he would have keeping somebody like Benny Gantz from the center or from the left in place if they came into the government. So, I think that the Ben-Gvir vote represents a certain populism that you see going through many countries around the world right now, in Europe and the United States. And he also represents, I think, many of Israelis' views, things that they've believed for a long time, and I think that it's healthy that view gets represented in the Knesset.
Alex, Ruthie, this has been great. What a breakdown of the Israeli political scene and what we can expect on November 1st. Last question from each of you. Final thoughts, what big picture, what are you watching in particular on November 1st, and what are the ramifications for Israel and Israel's standing in the world?
I can tell you what I hope for. I hope that the right has a clear majority. I hope the polls are only partly right. In other words, I hope the polls are wrong, that there's just equal numbers of an inability to form a coalition. I hope that in November, the midterms will show Republicans taking back Congress, and then the other challenges that Israel and America need to meet as allies, as natural allies, but not natural left-wing allies, natural conservative, liberal in the old style sense of liberal, conservative allies, and I hope that gets restored.
Yeah, pretty incredible, Alex. 2 crucial elections for 2 crucial partners, the United States and Israel, back to back, just 1 week apart. What are your thoughts?
Well, if you look at Yair Lapid's brief tenure as the interim caretaker prime minister, he went to the United Nations and he stated explicitly that Israel should work towards negotiating a 2-state solution with the Palestinian Authority. That comes after 9 years in which former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu refused to meet with Mahmoud Abbas or any members of the Palestinian Authority. In this last year, when Netanyahu's been out of office, Benny Gantz met multiple times with Mahmoud Abbas. He invited him to his home in Rosh Hashanah in central Israel. And I think that it's very clear that if the left will get into power, especially with a left-wing Biden administration in office, that there will be a very hard push to try to bring Israel back towards the failed Oslo 2-state paradigm. And I think that it represents a grave danger for Israel. In addition, we saw and we discussed how Lapid completely capitulated to Hezbollah on the northern border regarding the natural gas. And Israel may come to a head with the Iranian nuclear issue in these next coming years. Netanyahu has stated as much in an interview that I did with him just recently. He believes that it's his job to make sure that Iran never crosses the nuclear threshold. If you look at how Lapid and Gantz are trying to deal with the Palestinian Authority and with Hezbollah, it seems pretty clear that they may just allow Iran to cross that nuclear threshold, which would represent an existential threat to the state of Israel. So I think that there's a lot on the line, and I think many Israelis are hoping that the most tried and tested statesman, Benjamin Netanyahu, will return to power on November 1st.
Thanks again to Alex Traiman and Ruthie Bloom for that excellent analysis. Folks, be sure to check out their great work at jns.org, the Jewish News Syndicate. jns.org is a great site that I read every day to help me stay up to speed on Israel and the Middle East. They are doing important work. Hey, pray for Israel right now as they head into this election on Tuesday, November 1st. Thanks for joining us here for this Watchman Israel election preview. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.